Hi everyone, my name is Allison Moore-Bolware and I'm the Government Relations Director for the National Association of Social Workers Texas chapter. This is a very brief overview of NASW Texas's 2021 legislative priorities. Please know that this is not an in-depth review of all of our priorities, but really just an overview so you can see what we're working on and focusing on for next legislative session. So first I wanted to share that we at NASW Texas believe in a three-pronged approach to governmental affairs. The first is building relationships with legislators and other policymakers through TPACE, which is our PAC, lobbying and working with coalitions, and providing policy analysis. We also engage in legislative and regulatory advocacy on behalf of the profession and on issues affecting clients. And last, we work to educate members about the legislative process and policy issues that are important to social workers and the clients we serve. We do this through events such as Social Work Advocacy Day, which is a yearly event, as well as the NASW Texas e-news updates on government relations work, presenting to NASW Texas branches, classes, and other groups, mentoring students and supervising social work interns on policy issues and legislative advocacy, and last, through our advocacy Twitter page. So how do we create our legislative priorities? That's a great question. So the first way that we mostly do this is that a lot of the priorities we have are continuing professional priorities for social workers. They have been priorities for a while and we anticipate that they will always be priorities to us. Also, we listen to member input. So if members reach out to us, especially if we hear from a lot of members about an issue, we will consider putting it on our legislative priorities. We also consider what the reality is within Texas of us gaining any influence on this topic or policy issue, as well as what we can do in collaboration with other groups. Also, we do get guidance from our equity committees. So this is the first time that our legislative priorities were shared with all 4 of our equity committees for feedback and edits. And that was all before the final version went to the board for approval. The board also had some edits, and then based on those edits, we have the final version that you are about to see. So the first is related to the social work workforce, licensing, pay, incentives, and retention. The first is to continue to improve the Texas State Board of Social Work Examiners and Behavioral Health Executive Council. We continue to do this in a number of ways, whether it be advocating directly to the board and to BHEC on behalf of our members and the social work profession, but also talking to legislators about challenges that we have, as well as trying to improve administrative processes and any funding related items at the Capitol to improve the board and the overall process. Next, we support Medicaid reimbursement parity across mental health professionals, so LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs to get paid the same amount for psychotherapy under Medicaid, and allowing LMSWs that are under supervision to get their LCSWs to bill for psychotherapy. That's a bill that we've worked on in the past, and we will continue to work on that in the future. Last is to increase funding for the existing mental health loan repayment program that is currently at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Next, we work to transform child welfare and adult abuse in Texas through prevention and intervention efforts that utilize social workers. Also supporting families before system involvement in CPS or APS through community alternatives and advocating for those alternatives. Also, legislation that would require a 4-year degree for CPS caseworkers with a preference on DFPS recruiting social workers. And last is working with our partners to influence training and culture related to racial equity, social justice, and secondary trauma for DFPS and APS workers. Last, looking at supporting programs and funding alternatives that utilize social workers as a preventative for first response or multidisciplinary teams to provide interventions to divert people with mental health conditions from involvement with the criminal justice system. Next, access to services and telehealth. As you know, telehealth utilization has grown exponentially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we want to ensure that access to needed mental health treatment is continued by ensuring that state-regulated and Medicaid plans authorize and reimburse audio-only telephone telehealth, provide pay parity for telehealth and in-person services, and allow providers to choose the HIPAA-compliant platform of their choice without intervention from a health plan requiring them to use a certain platform. Also, we're investigating ways to allow qualified licensed mental health professionals from other states to provide services in Texas through telehealth. We also want to work on mental health system improvements. And part of this is a huge one, is adding a definition of school social work services to the Texas Education Code. There currently isn't any definition of school social work services in any portion of Texas law. So we really see this as a key foundation to getting school social workers embedded in more systems and being able to advocate for their profession, for their position, as well as better serve communities and families and students based on the definition that would be embedded in the code. Also, promoting efforts to improve the entire mental health system across the state, including goals for social justice and client access at every entry point. Next is health and well-being. So as social workers, we want to ensure that every Texan has access to affordable quality health care with an emphasis on low-income and at-risk populations, including women's reproductive health. We want to explore ways to increase Medicaid eligibility and access. We also want to work with partners to address social determinants of health and improve health outcomes for all Texans. Equity issues. We want to advocate for Texas to partner with the federal government to ensure that all children and families involved in the immigration process have a more equitable and humane experience in that process. We also want to promote and protect any measures that would harm immigrants. We want to protect them from any negative impacts of legislation. We also want to work with partners to advance legislation that promotes the civil rights of all Texans, ensuring that all services remain available to LGBTQIA+ Texans. We want to work with our partners on police reform to promote anti-racist practices and the utilization of social workers as a first response. We also want to address systemic oppression and increase accountability while working within oppressive systems, which we know that there is a lot of conversation right now about how social workers can engage in oppressive systems while also maintaining our social justice values and our ethical values as social workers. And last, promote voting engagement and end any efforts of voter suppression. So as you can see, we have a very robust legislative priorities list for 2021, and we also want to encourage everyone to vote, that social workers do vote, that social work is voting, and that we want to make sure that everyone both votes and encourages those around them to vote in the coming election, that it really does make a difference. So how can you get involved in more of our legislative advocacy efforts? The first is to become an NASW Texas member. That, our voices are stronger together. We want everyone to be involved, to know what we're doing, to know what we're working on, and to work with us. We will be sharing advocacy alerts on how you can get involved with different bills that we're working on, as well as how you can support other bills that we might not be the lead on, but that we support. And on the other side, advocating for any bills to fail that we don't want to pass. So reaching out to your legislators either to support or oppose a bill based on how we feel as social workers within the state. Also, we have an NASW Texas Advocacy Twitter that is new and that we're really trying to use to promote all of our legislative work, and that we really plan to use it as the first stop to seeing what we're up to, what we're working on at the Capitol. Also, stay tuned for an NASW Texas Advocacy email group that will be specifically about advocacy during the session, and quick advocacy alerts, ways to stay involved, ways for you to reach out, talking points for you to use on a number of different issues related to our legislative agenda. So last, I just want to say thank you for tuning in to learn more about what the NASW Texas legislative priorities are for the 2021 session. While we may not know what the session will look like, whether it will be virtual or in person or partly both, know that NASW Texas will be there, that we will be fighting for the profession and also fighting for the rights and all of the services for clients that we serve as well. Thank you so much for all that you do as social workers across the state, and know that I am honored to represent y'all whenever I'm up at the Capitol. And it is just such an honor to be able to, as a social worker myself, also be able to talk about all of the great work that y'all are doing as well. Thank you, and please stay tuned for all the ways that you can be involved with NASW Texas advocacy in the future.